Good morning, and on behalf of the Archdiocese of San Francisco, welcome to Mosaic. The Archdiocese has a weekly newsletter that goes out to all our parishes and schools and other institutions, and we recently posed this question to the readers. If you had the opportunity to sit down one-on-one with a priest, what questions might you have for him? What would you want to know about this man, these men, and their unique vocation, their way of life? Do you have questions about life, about faith, about his vocation, about your own spiritual condition? You may wonder such things as, how do I overcome my fear of going to confession? Or how can I learn to pray? Or how can I understand the real presence of Jesus in the Eucharist? Or why do we see so many young people leaving the church or dissatisfied with the faith? Now, we asked for questions to be submitted, and today we have as our guests two priests of the Archdiocese to sit with us and share some answers. It promises to be a very interesting discussion. So after this brief break, please join me and our guests for Ask a Priest. Hello and welcome to Mosaic. My guests today are two priests of the Archdiocese of San Francisco. We're going to talk about questions that are being submitted to the priests and see what the answers can be. On my left is Father Kevin Kennedy. Father, thank you for being here. And on his left is Father Cameron Fowler. Now, you can see that we have a young priest and a slightly older priest. So let's find out about their lives and careers. Father Fowler, start with you.
So I've been a priest for 4 years. I'm entering my 5th year as a priest, and currently I'm assigned as the vocation director of San Francisco, as well as the priest secretary of Archbishop Corleone.
4 years.
4
and
years.
You went to St. Patrick's Seminary
I went
here?
to St. Patrick's in the area, for my theology studies.
And are you a local product?
I am. I grew up in Marin County, in Novato, Our Lady of Loretto Parish, and so, yeah.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Okay. And Father Kevin, you I know, and I think you're from...
I was born in San Mateo,
San
grew up in
Mateo.
Belmont, so I'm a local product.
And been a priest
Archdiocese.
for over 2 decades.
Yes.
And your job, your
I'm
assignment?
the pastor of Our Lady of Fatima, which is a Byzantine Catholic parish within the Archdiocese, and also help as associate at St. Monica and St. Thomas Apostle Parish as well.
Good. Okay. 20 years, 4 years. And now we had a set of questions coming in from people, and I want to kind of mix and match them, but one of the major ones was about the recent Pew study, this reputable survey organization that says that the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist, which is a central teaching of the Catholic faith, and the Eucharist is I think the center of what the priest's life is and job is, 70% of Catholics say they don't believe in the real presence or not sure about that. So that's something I'd like you to respond to. Is this something that you experience as the priest who is presiding at the Eucharist? Father Fowler, what do you say?
Yeah, I would say that those studies don't surprise me. I'd say when we look out into the pews at the masses that we celebrate, it's something that we can see in people's faces in terms of their belief or lack of belief in the real presence of the Eucharist. But then as a priest, the question becomes, what do we need to do to address this? And obviously catechesis is one thing, but I always have felt that actions speak louder than words. And when you begin to act like you believe, slowly you begin to actually believe more. And so as a church, I think if we did a better job acting like we actually believe in the real presence, from the way we talk about it, the way we act in front of it, the way priests celebrate Mass, I think all of that would generate a deeper faith in our people. Because when I deal with younger kids, the second graders in school, preparing for First Communion, they believe. They have this deep, mysterious belief in the Eucharist. But unfortunately, they don't always see that belief lived out in their masses that they go to or in the parishes. And so I think that belief begins to diminish as they get older. So I think acting like we believe could be a start to addressing this.
The priest's way of performing the liturgy, Father Kevin?
I think that's crucial. He's not an actor in that sense of performing something he doesn't believe, because you can't fool people. You have to be a priest who believes that he's acting in persona Christi, in the person of Christ, and that Christ is central to the priesthood. His mission is not to draw people so much to himself, but through himself to Christ, that encounter with the Lord. And if he believes what the church believes and teaches in the celebration, the offering of the Eucharist. He believes that this is truly the mystery of Christ, present, renewed, offered to the Father. Then he will naturally express that through reverence,
Yes.
through love. You can't fake that. Unfortunately, when a priest doesn't celebrate with reverence, people pick up on that and they think, well, if he doesn't believe, why should I? So priests are crucial in terms of their focus on their dedication to this central mystery, and especially their reverence in the celebration of the Mass.
And I guess the priest is, we think of priests doing various tasks and jobs, and they can be educators, or they can be teachers, or they can be, but is your central task the saying of the liturgy, is the saying of the Mass?
A priest, the very nature of priesthood, is offering sacrifice. In all world religions, a priest offers sacrifice. That's his crucial defining role. Others can do academic work and social work, community organizing, administration. All of those things can be part of, and are to some degree a part of, anyone's priesthood. But in addition to preaching the gospel, his central role is to offer the sacrifice of the cross, the sacrificial love of the Lord, offered, reactualized, renewed in the presence of the community, and done with great reverence and care and love, so that that community sees Christ renewing his offering of himself on our behalf to the Father.
And I understand that. I mean, I can't imagine what the real presence is, but I understand the teaching, and that you are putting me in a special relationship with God himself in that moment. Now that's, I'd call that the big sacrament. Now there's the slightly smaller sacrament of confession, but seems also absolutely important, in which you, the priest, put me in touch with God as forgiving my sins. Now, we had a question bearing on that about a fear of going to confession. How do I overcome my fear of going to confession? What do you think, Father?
I think one of the fears, so what is the fear? And I think one of the fears is the priest is going to judge me, especially if I know that priest, and if they hear my voice or they see my face, they're going to judge me differently. I think one of the things that helps limit that is, as priests, we know first and foremost that we're sinners. We know the sins of our past. We know with the things we struggle with in our own life. And that gives us a certain level of, I would say, compassion and empathy for the person that's coming to the confessional. So we're not there to judge. We're there to stand in the place of Christ the physician, to bring ultimately healing to these people's lives. And that is who the people are seeking to encounter, is Christ. And our job as priests is, in a sense, to get out of the way so Christ can speak through us, in a sense. And so I would say that's a helpful piece of advice, is just know that we are not there to judge. We know the state of our own souls, and we know the sins of many people that come to us, and so we're not there to judge.
On a practical level, I might say sometimes it's easier for people to, if they're planning to go to confession, to find maybe a priest that they don't know.
Yes.
And to go anonymously behind the screen, so that they don't feel on a human level that sense of trepidation.
I understand.
But in whatever circumstances, the goal is that they leave with joy, that what the Lord forgives, he forgets, he takes away as if it had never happened, and he brings us back to the moment of our baptism, which should be a great, great joy.
Amen to that. We'll take another brief break, and please come back, rejoin us, and we'll talk more about the questions for the priests. Hello and welcome back. We're talking with Father Kevin Kennedy here and Father Cameron Fowler about the life of a priest. We had an omnibus question come in, and it's a pretty good one, I think. What is success for a priest? I think we know what success for a baseball player is. What is success for a priest? And by the same token, what is failure? How would a priest fail? We know how a plumber might fail. Yeah, that's obvious. Can you address those things, Father Kevin?
Well, we were talking this morning about one of my favorite films. It was one of my mother's favorite films from 1944, The Keys of the Kingdom.
Yeah.
And Gregory Peck plays a priest who is presumably a failure in his first 2 assignments, and so he is sent to be a missionary in China. And yet he ends up touching the hearts of many people, the lives of many people, through his gentleness, through his humility, through his authenticity. He embodies the best of the priesthood, and so even though it's a fictional character, he is the best of Vincent de Paul and Jean Vianney and so many others who embody the best of what it is to pattern their lives after the heart of the Lord. Learn from me, for I am gentle and humble of heart. If a person with that kind of a heart touches the soul of another human being, he is a success as a priest. He's a success in what matters to God.
Yes. Brother Feller.
Recently, I've been thinking about that idea of success. What does success mean in my priesthood? And on one hand, I would say every single day is successful in that, as Father Kennedy was saying earlier, the job of a priest is to offer the sacrifice of the Mass. And every single day, I offer the sacrifice of the Mass for the glorification of God the Father and the salvation of souls. And so in a sense, I could say every single day for a priest is successful. Now, on another level, like, well, what does that mean, I guess, away from that reality? It's bringing people closer to Christ, to having people come to realize that Christ is the way, the truth, and the life, and being willing to surrender themselves to that life. And that would be a success for a priest, is to bringing people closer to Christ.
And it does seem the case that Jesus founded this priesthood. He named his apostles to be his followers and preachers, to bring people to him. I am the way, the truth, and the life. So it's an ancient tradition that you're carrying out, but ever new. And speaking of success and failure, the person to whom you're bringing people, Jesus Christ, looks a lot like a massive failure when he's up on the crucifix, doesn't he? Yeah. But we have the crucifix in the church to remind us of what?
To remind us that failure and success is not exactly what we think it might be.
Yeah.
That from a Christian perspective, failure in a sense leads to success. That God will allow us to fail. That through our sufferings is actually where our successes or triumphs come. So it's kind of a reverse on the way we normally think of things in society, I would say.
Yes. And also about your life as a priest, there must be joys and there must be sorrows or difficulties. I was thinking when you were talking about confession, if I had to hear people's sins day after day, year after year, I would get a little depressed. But what's your reaction to that?
And that's what many people think. I was saying that when a person has a humble and contrite heart, which is ultimately what God wants from us, a humble and contrite heart, there's nothing more beautiful than that confession. And it doesn't necessarily matter the sins they're confessing in that moment, but when they come with a humble and contrite heart and you're able to reconcile them to God the Father through the grace of the sacrament of confession, that is one of the greatest joys of a priest, I would say.
And joys, difficulties, what stands out for you?
I think the greatest joy for me would be to see the young people who are coming to the churches where Father Cameron celebrates, where I celebrate, many of whom are converts, so they've had to struggle to find their faith in a very secular culture.
Yeah.
They've had to sometimes catechize themselves to some extent, read the fathers of the church and participate in the liturgies. Their courage in finding and persevering in their faith, their hope against, difficult odds, and that belief and that trust that make love, real love, possible in their hearts, love for God and love for one another. They are my greatest joy because they are the future of the church, and they're a real future.
That's good to know. Now, you mentioned young people converting or coming to the church. One of our questions was a concern that many people have is so many young people seem to be leaving the Catholic Church. Can you address that? Is this a problem?
Yeah, I think we see it when we look out into our pews and don't see many young people, college age or high school age, and many people ask, what are we supposed to do? How do we handle this? And a lot of times we think if we just make things more entertaining, more engaging, then the young people will come back. But I really deeply believe the young people are searching for God. And the more that we can be a place where they find the transcendence of God, where they can experience the mystery of God, where they can be touched by the love of God, the more young people will come back because they're searching for it, they're seeking for it. And I believe we can offer it, but it might not be exactly in the way we normally think by trying to engage them with entertaining things or things that try to captivate their interest right away.
The Archbishop is trying to promote this sense of truth, of beauty, and of goodness right now.
Yes.
And when you begin with the liturgy itself, that the truth is being proclaimed in the goodness of a community formed by faith, by hope, by love, as I was just mentioning, but through the beauty of sacred worship, the beauty of images, of music, the reverence of the liturgical celebration itself, especially on the part of the priest, engaging homilies, that this is centrally most important in the future of our Christian Catholic communities.
So you find joy in the young people that you see coming in. That's
yes, because
wonderful.
they're being drawn to all of this.
Wonderful.
They're not finding this anywhere else in their lives. Their lives, as we discussed this morning, are really empty despite technology that's meant to facilitate communication. Often it leads to a sense of self-estrangement, of isolation. And so they're only going to find the healing of their loneliness and their inner emptiness in a believing, worshiping community.
All right. I take that as given. We'll take a brief break and be back for one more segment of discussion with our priests today. Hello and welcome back for our final segment of discussion with the priests. Now, you're both local fellows. I haven't asked you how you discerned individually your vocation as a priest. Can I get that from you?
I was actually in second grade the year that I made my first Holy Communion. My uncle was ordained a priest for another diocese. He lived elsewhere. But I was present in October of 1961 at his ordination. So this was a magnificent event, and his first solemn high mass was later at Our Lady of Angels Church in Burlingame. And I can remember being present, and the beautiful choir, and the family was all present, and thinking, you know what? I think I'd like to do that when I grow up. No. So I had thought of a lot of other things, but when I saw him there at the altar, I thought, this is a beautiful event. And it was so not centered on the priest, but on Christ.
Yes.
Bringing Christ people to Christ.
You got that. You felt
Truth,
that.
beauty, and goodness.
Truth, beauty, and goodness.
And that's, obviously, as a second grader, I wasn't being compelled by theological arguments. It was something that I felt as a child at that age.
That seed can be planted. And what about your experience in...
So I grew up never wanting to be a priest. I had no interest in it. If you would have given me like a list of 10 things to do in my life, I would have put priesthood at the very bottom. And that was my kind of sentiment in high school. And it all changed when I went on this religious pilgrimage to Lourdes, France, in my freshman year of college, after my freshman year. And in a moment of prayer there, I just had the realization that I had never asked God what he wanted me to do with my life. And I asked that dangerous question. And all of a sudden, I felt this deep inspiration and joy to be a priest. Definitely a lot of fear, but also an inspiration and a joy that this is how the Lord was asking me to give of my life to him. And that I followed that path until the priesthood.
And you're now, how old are you now?
I am 31 now.
So a good decade and more.
It was about a decade ago.
Training.
Yeah.
That's wonderful. That's very interesting. So let me ask this question. This program that we're doing now, I think, will be broadcast on November 3rd, Vocations Sunday, or Vocations Awareness Sunday.
Correct.
You are the director of the Office of Vocations for the Archdiocese, in addition to everything else.
Correct.
So let's talk about, are we finding vocations to the priesthood among our young men, or where are vocations coming from, or how does a young man begin to think about such a vocation?
It's a great struggle. As everyone knows, the numbers are not great. We don't have many inquiries. We don't have many men in the seminary. And it's a big issue. Other places of the country are doing a little bit better than I would say we are necessarily on the West Coast. But I would say the fundamental crisis is a basic vocation crisis. And we see this, there's a lack of people getting married anymore, marriage in the church.
Quite true, yes.
And so I think it's a realization that our life is a gift, that God gave us our life as a gift through our parents. And that the ultimate and fundamental question of our life is, how am I being called to take this life of mine, which is a gift, and offer it back? That's what a vocation is. How is God calling me to offer my life as a gift? And I think the more we can help young people realize that's the meaning of life, that's the purpose of life, the more they'll be open to a vocation to marriage, a vocation to the priesthood, religious life, some other type of special vocation. But I think they have to start asking that question first before we can even get them on the path of potential priesthood vocation.
It's interesting you mentioned the marriage rate down too. That's certainly a vocation, and I can attest that I'm married, and there are times when if it weren't my vocation and my calling, it would be difficult to fulfill it. But it continues because it is a sort of sacred obligation and a gift, a re-gifting of myself to someone else.
Yes.
I think the key element is prayer. We pray for vocations because the Lord himself asked us to do that. The harvest is abundant, but the laborers are few, so pray to the Lord of the harvest. This is going to be aired later, but we're taping today, which happens to be October 15th, the feast of St. Teresa of Jesus, Teresa
I did not
of
know
Avila.
that. Okay.
And she once said, prayer is simply a heart-to-heart conversation with God, who we know loves us. A heart-to-heart conversation to pray for your priests, for their sanctification, to pray for future priests, our seminarians, to pray for those who are searching for meaning, for truth, for value, for love within their lives, that through that prayer, the grace of God might be communicated to them in a way that really touches them and changes them so that they can become a priest like, even though he's a fictional character, that wonderful priest portrayed in the Keys of the Kingdom, patterning his life after the heart of the Lord, gentle and humble and of service to others, loving service.
Now let me ask you this. We're talking about a vocation. Are there hero or model or mentor priests that you can recall in your life?
So one of the priests recently that has been a great model for me is, he's a saint, Saint Isaac Jogues, one of the North American martyrs. And he grew up in France and came to the New World to bring the faith to the people in this land. And the amount that he sacrificed out of love for the gospel, the amount that he loved his people that he was trying to communicate the faith to, is deeply inspiring. I hope one day to visit his gravesite there in, I believe, northern New York. But he's an inspiration for me recently as a priest and a saint.
Wonderful. And I think we only have 20, 30 seconds left here, so we're going to wrap it up. Thank you very much, Father Fowler, for coming and discussing with us. Father Kevin, same thing. It's always great to talk with you.
Thank you.
And I've learned a lot about the vocation of the priest. And can we say, in closing, it's not the most difficult life of all? Or we don't want to scare people off. It's difficult, but it's doable.
It's joyful. It should be joyful.
Yes.
And you bring joy to it. Thank you very much for being here, and thank you for watching Mosaic.